In this video, we're going to extend upon the ideas and concepts that we did in the part 3 video, which was to put items within a list. In this video, we're going to retrieve data from a database and then display the contents in the list view. So on the screen here, I've got a button that says Get Data. Beneath that is a text view that will display the progress of the operation when you click the button, and then beneath that will display the list view with the retrieved data. So to demonstrate, I'm going to go ahead and click the button. There was our progress, and then these are the items in the list, and I can scroll down to see more. So that is the objective of this video, is to build this little app, and let's go ahead and get started. To begin part 4 of our video, let's discuss the prerequisites that you're going to need to set up your project correctly. First of all, you're going to need to download the JDBC library, that stands for Java Database Connector, and it can be found right here. So this is the web address we're going to be using in this video. It will take you to a web page that looks like this. You can create a free Oracle account for more resources and things like that, or you can just click no, just start my download. And when you do, you're going to be going to your downloads folder or wherever it happens to download, and you're going to have to extract it. If you're on a Mac, just simply double click it. If you're on a Windows PC, just right click it and select extract all. It'll create this folder right here, and the file that we will be importing is this one right here. So later on in the video when we import it, this is the file that you want. Secondly, I've also created a link to a page for the Microsoft SQL example, and the procedure will be the same, but I'm not going to be covering that. I will show you that the web page looks like this. So this is the Microsoft version. You download the driver there, and you'll have to adapt the code that I do cover in the example to be more reflective of this, but it's extremely similar in its process. Okay, my goal in this video is to explain how to connect to a SQL database to my students using just Java, since that's what we've already covered. There are other approaches that include other languages being embedded in your project, like PHP or Python. You can explore those, but in this video I'm trying to keep it simple for my students by just doing Java and SQL together. So you can see that my other goals in this video is how do you import jar files, how do you compile these additional jar files with your project, how to connect to the database using this new library, reading data from the library or using the library, and then presenting that in the list view. Now, as a special note, the whole idea of databases and how they work and how to implement them is beyond the scope of this video. I'm only going to be addressing this as an example of the need-to-know information for this particular app. If you want to explore more about databases, there are excellent tutorials out there. If you look at the MySQL.com examples, they are fantastic. Now, just to show you what the example database in this app is going to be covering, it only has one table. We're calling it fruits, and the fruits table contains 3 columns. It has an ID column, which is going to be unique, and it auto increments. It's the primary key. It also has a column called name, and examples of names would be like apple, banana, pear, watermelon. And then it has a price column, which has a decimal type of data. I've loaded in 9 example records. It could be anything really, but just something to display on the screen. I'm going to be taking the approach that I have 2 items here. I've got a name and a price that I'm most interested in, so I'm going to load them in as a dictionary. You don't have to do that approach. If this was a table with more data in it, I would probably take an alternative approach in which I would create a custom class and then create a list of those objects. So just know that this is just one way to tackle reading in data, and in this case I have only 2 bits of information that I really am focusing on, so I'm using a dictionary approach to it. Okay, so just to show you the database that we're reading from, This is called MySQL Workbench. You can download that from the MySQL website as well. There's the download button right there. And once you connect to your database, let me show you what I have in it right now. So this is the name of my database. This is the table that I have in it, and these are the three columns right here, ID, name, and price. If I run the command here, if I declare that I want to select all, star means all, from the database called MHS underscore example, and from the fruits table within that database, it's going to give me these results down here. So these are going to be the examples that we're going to display in our app. Okay, with that being said, let's go ahead and start making our project. So let's create a new Android Studio project by clicking this, and then we're going to name this something new. I'm going to call this the MySQL example project, and go ahead and click next. Now, this one in particular, we can go with Lollipop or above. So go ahead and pick API 21 or higher, and then you're going to click next, and then click empty project. Ours is only going to have one screen just to keep it simple, so we'll call this main activity, and then you let your project build. Our first steps are going to actually be to import that library and make sure that it compiles with our project. So what we're going to do here is we're going to right click on app and select new module. And then down here you should get the little template for importing a jar file. So we're going to do that, and then you're going to navigate to your downloads. So I'm going to go ahead and shrink this down a little bit. I'm going to open up downloads, and then here's my extracted folder, and then I'm going to expand out the MySQL connector-java folder, and then right here is the file that ends in .jar. So you're going to select OK and then finish. Now what this is going to be making for us is it made another module here in our Gradle scripts. And the next step is to say that our main module that is going to get compiled, it needs to tell the app that after it's done doing everything in here, it needs to also compile this new module as well. So down at the bottom, we're going to type compile project, and then a set of single quotes, and in between the single quotes we're going to put a colon, and then you're going to type the name of this connector. Now a little cheat here would be to just simply open up that module, and you're just going to copy this name right here, up to .jar. So I'm going to copy all of this, and then I'm going to go back over to this screen where I started typing and just paste that in. So we're going to compile this module after this module has completed. Now the next thing that we need to do is save that, and we can close these now. And we're going to go up to our app, expand that, expand manifest, and the Android manifest here is going to require that we give it permissions to connect to the internet so it can reach our database. So I'm going to put a little space up top here below the introduction of the manifest, and I'm going to type uses permission, and I'm going to auto-complete that. And you can see here it's popping up, say, android.permission.internet, and that's exactly what we want. And then we're going to end that little bracket. So this is the line that we're going to add to that, and we can save it now and close that as well. Now to make sure all of that worked, I'm going to build the project. So I'm going to click rebuild and make sure there's no errors. And down here, it'll show you that it's generating. And if that completes successfully, now we can begin building our project. So here it says Gradle completed, and all went well. My next step is to create a Java class. So I'm going to select the Java folder and expand that out, and I'm going to put it in this package right here, which is our main package. So you can right click, select new, and select Java class. Now the purpose of this class is to hold all of the strings that our connections are going to require. So like the database URL, the database name, the username and the password of the database. So I'm going to call it DB strings, like that, and then click OK. So each one of these is going to be static so that we can access it with other files. Now, the reason why I'm doing it this way is because that way I don't have to retype these strings if I were to do other things like update the database, insert to the database, delete from the database. All these strings are going to be located in one class, and I only have to modify them in one place. So they're going to be constants, so we're going to declare them final, and they're all strings, so they're containing text. And the first one I'm going to name database URL in all uppercase because it's a constant. And then you're going to put in some web address that gets to your database. If you're testing it locally, like with an Apache server or whatnot, it'd be like 192.168.0.6 or something. Or if you're hosting on the web, it could be like 10.20.30.50. And then all, well, I should say most, unless they're customized MS or MySQL servers, are at port 3306. And that's going to hold where to find your database. So change these numbers right here to whatever your web address is, and then it's usually port 3306, but you should check with your database provider. Static final string. The next one's going to be the name of the database. So database name, and mine is MHS example. The third thing that our files are going to need to know is what is the username to log in. So I'm just going to make a username equals some user. And then lastly, you're going to need the password. So your DB strings file will look something like that. The most important thing is change this to be whatever the web address is and make sure you're on port 3306, which is pretty standard. Okay, you can save that and close the DB strings, and we'll be using that shortly. Our next step will be to design the layouts of our app here. So you can switch over to the activity_main XML file that describes our layout. If you accidentally closed it, it's in resources, layout, activity_main. The first thing to do is to delete this little hello world text view, and I'm going to build this from the top down. So the first thing to add at the top was a button, and I'm going to anchor it to the top like this. So I'm grabbing these constraints and I am essentially gluing them to the sides. We're going to change the ID of this button to be the Get Data button, and the text of it should say Get Data. So let me find the text property, and I'm going to put Get Data. And I'm also going to make this match the parent, so it's a wide button. The next thing in here is to add a text view underneath, and I'm going to make the text view essentially glued to the bottom of Get Data and glued to the right and left sides. The ID of the text view is going to be the progress text view, so that when we click the button, it can see the progress of the database or any failures that it would have. Temporarily, we're going to put in progress in the text of it just so we can see that. And as the program runs, it's going to overwrite that text. Underneath that, we're going to add a container for a list view. All right, so this is where you find it in the palette, and we're going to drop it in right here. And we're going to anchor that to be beneath the text, and then we can put it anchored to the right and left side and all the way to the bottom. All right, so with this selected, we're going to give a name to it. I'm going to call it My List View, just like in the previous video. And you'll start to see it populate with some example data. Now we want the items to have a custom look just like we did in the previous video, so we're going to make another layout for that. So I'm going to select the layout folder in my project tree and select New Layout Resource File, and the name of this file will be Item Layout, and its root element will be a we're going to make it a text view. And no, I'm sorry, we're going to make it a relative layout. And then we're going to click OK. All right, so again, that one has a relative layout over here in case I move too fast. Now over in this space, we can design what it's going to look like. So we're simply just going to put a text view right here and a text view right here. This one's going to be the name and this one's going to be the price. All right, so I'm going to select this one and I'm going to call it Name Text View. And I'm going to say yes to update all references. And temporarily, I'm just going to put name in the text, and that'll get it overwritten later. And over here, this is price. I'm going to change the ID of the one on the right to say price. I'm sorry, price text view. And I also want to add a little bit of margin to the bottom of these so that there's spacing between the next element that pops in the list. So the fastest way to do that is just go into the text mode of this, and you can see we've got a margin for the top. We can also add a margin for the bottom. So I'm just going to add an extra line in here, start typing Android. I'm going to push Tab to autocomplete. And if I start typing layout, you can see that I've got a margin on the bottom right there. And let's give it 24 dp so that it's equal on the top and the bottom. Now if you want to be consistent, this one is actually going to push it down for both, but you could add it to this one down here as well. I'm going to skip it because I know that this alignment will actually give it 24 dp beneath it and above it. All right, so now we're going to save it and we can close that one as well. All right, we're done with the layout, so if you want to close both tabs, you can. And let's move on to how we're going to put that item layout in the list view. And to do that, we're going to have to create an item adapter. I covered what the item adapter class does for us in the last video, but let me sum this up real quick. The item layout right here is going to be used in activity_main. So basically what we're doing is we're taking the layout that you see here where we're aligning the name to the left and the price to the right, and we want the individual items in our list view to look like that, not like this. So this is allowing our custom layout file to be repeated and inflated in here with the values that we want from our database. So we have to define a new class to do that, and we're going to call it item adapter. And if you want to see the details of what an item adapter is and does and how it's defined, take a look at the part 3 video, and that'll allow us to move quickly through this. So we're going to create a new Java class in your main package here, and we're calling it item adapter, and it extends from base adapter. And I'm going to click OK. And here's where I'm going to save some time. I'm going to paste in the entire class so that we can move a little bit quicker here. So the first thing that you're going to put in are the variables for this particular class. This class will have a layout inflator that we're going to call M inflator. And again, we put an M in here because it's kind of standard to say this is a member of this class. The map is going to be the key value pairs that we're reading in. That's the name of the fruit and its price. And here's where, like I said in the opening of this video, that if you wanted to create a separate class that describes multiple fields, you could take that approach, and instead you would be building objects of that class and putting them into an array list or some sort of list. Now down here, the count, the get item, and the get ID, specifically the get item ID, is going to want to know, okay, what position gets clicked in the list or something like that, or get item would want to do that as well. So for purposes of indexing, I'm going to transform that list, or I'm sorry, that map into two lists here called names and prices, and that way you can identify like what particular item got clicked if you want to add a click event to an item in a list. So I've also added a constructor here where it requires the context of this item adapter, in other words, which screen opened this up, and it needs that key value pair map that we are creating, which is essentially a dictionary. And then this just initializes their starting values. So then, as I said before, these are going to be the methods that are required from this class. We need to be able to count the items in the list. We need to be able to return an item when requested and get its item, or its ID. Lastly, this is the most important part here, is we want to inflate our current, or inflate the item layout and then put the name and the price in each one. So this is how we do that. And the technical aspects of this are pretty much the same as in the part 3 video. So I'm really stressing that if you don't understand this, go back and watch that other video, but here's the quick version, is we're identifying each text view by finding it within the inflator, and then we are setting the values as the values of names and prices as it relates to these lists up here. And then we're returning that particular view, which is the layout file, so that it can get put into that list. All right, so that is the item adapter class. We have one last thing to do, and that is to make main activity load in our database and use these two classes and these two layout files. So now within our main activity class, I'm going to add some class variables here that I'm just going to explain. So the first of which is we're going to need that item adapter, so we're going to create a variable for that. And then we're also going to create a context, because this is going to get passed in to the constructor of item adapter as to what the context is. And we'll have to do that within an inner class. So we're going to need to pass it from this class into the inner class, and that'll become more evident when we do that part. Next, we have to identify the list view where all of those individual copies of item layout go into, and we also want to display the progress of what's going on behind the scenes for the user's benefit. And lastly, we're going to be loading in those key value pairs, the name of the fruit and the price of the fruit, into a linked hash map. The reason why I'm doing that is because that's always stored in the same order. So this allows us to have more consistent indexing than, say, just a plain old hash map or dictionary. Okay, now that we've done that, a few of those need to be initialized with starting values. So we're going to put that in the onCreate method. So when this main activity is loaded, we're going to give those some starting values. And so ListView is going to point to the list, the progress text view is going to point to the progress text view, and this context is going to be this. Okay, so next up, the thing that we're going to do is the progress text view still says the word progress in it, so we're going to blank it out. So our layout file shows it. I'm sorry, it's this one. It shows the word progress just so we can see it in the layout file. So this line of code is going to blank it out. All right, the next thing is we're going to create a reference to the button that can get clicked. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste that in here. It's similar to what we've done up above. So that finds it for us. And then we're going to create a button listener. So when the button is clicked, we want to do this. So our nickname for button is BTN, and we're setting it so that the program is going to listen for when it gets clicked, and when it does, we're going to run a method called getData, which we're going to create in a minute, so that's why this is red. And it's going to retrieve, I'm sorry, we're not creating a method, we're creating a class called getData that's a private inner class to main activity, and then we're going to execute that. Okay, so now that it's all set up, let's create this special private inner class that is going to do all of the retrieving of the data from the database. So before we write the inner class in here, I found it just through experience to tell students to mark the end of the outer class so they don't accidentally remove that curly brace or type over it or forget about it. So I'm just going to mark a comment in here that says end of main activity. And that's just something experience has taught me to note to students. So now we can start this inner class. So I'm going to add a little bit of extra space in here, and we're going to call it private class get data. Now this is going to extend async task, which takes 3 strings. And also this class contains an abstract method that we have to define called do in background. So you can see the little comment right here. So the fastest way to do that is you push Alt Enter, or you could click this little light bulb over here that says implement methods. So I'm going to push Alt Enter, implement the missing method, and then we get to define it. But before we define that one, I want to put in some class variables and the thing that happens before the processes begin. So I'm just going to copy those in for speeding along this recording and just tell you what those are. So first of all, we're going to create a string that is going to be displayed in the progress text view. Next up, we have to tell our program here how to connect to the database. So that functionality was included in the library that we imported, the jar file that we started off our program with. So that one is located within the package com.mysql.jdbc, and we're using the driver class out of that. So now that we've told the program how to connect, we are going to then need to tell it, okay, where can it find the database? So in terms of using the driver, we're going to use JDBC. It's MySQL driver here, and then this was defined in our DB strings class where that URL will be, and then the database name. So we're going to concatenate these 3. That means join together these strings, these words, to form one place where the driver can go and find our database. All right, now before we begin our operation, we can present the user with some data in the progress text view saying connecting the database. So this is before we actually attempt to do it, and that kind of updates the user with what's going on. Okay, so now let's actually try to connect to that database. We're going to add some stuff before we return anything. So now the first thing that we're going to do in this method is create a connection and then a request, which we call a statement, to the SQL database. So an example of a statement would be like select all from um, our fruits table, so something like this. All right, then we're going to create a try-catch block that's going to catch our connection error first, and if the connection fails, then it'll say this, and then print that to the console. But right now you're going to get a red squiggly line because we don't have a connection attempted. All right, so let's do that next. All right, so the first thing is we have to load that JDBC driver. So it's called JDBC driver. We created that constant for that. And then we're going to take the connection and use the driver manager from java.sql and get the connection. Now what we're going to plug in here is, and let me shrink this down to give some more room here, the URL of where to go. And in the DB strings class, we have the username, and we have the password. All right, so this will go to that URL, find the database, use this username, and use that password. Okay, next up, we've got the statement that we want to do. So statement is going to be created like that. And then we're going to just create our request as a string. So I'm going to call that SQL, and it's going to be select all from fruits. Now, next up, I almost forgot to import the exception for this, so you can push Alt-Enter here to add another catch block down here for you. Or if you click into it, you're going to get like a little light bulb over here. You can do the same thing. You can add a catch right there. So what this is trying to catch is if it can't find that class for the driver that we noted above. So that was this class right there. So if it can't find that, it'll throw this exception. So let's give a message to the user when that takes place. And I'll just make this one a little bit different. A class not found exception was thrown. All right, and that'll tell you that that line of code didn't work right there. Next, we want to, now that we've initialized the statement and we've initialized the SQL string to hold our request, we want to go through the result set. So let's create a result set variable called rs, which is going to use our statement to execute a query, and we're going to give it the SQL command that we want. So that will then be useful for us to loop through. So we're going to create a while loop that will say that as so long as the result set has another record, as long as that's true, we're going to keep looping. And we're going to retrieve two things. The first one's a string that is called name, and that's going to come from the result set's getString method looking for a field called name. The next one will be a double, and since the SQL database is storing it as a decimal, this is the equivalent in Java. Java stores decimal values as floats or doubles, so we're going to just store it as a double. It's more precision. And we're going to call it price, just as the database calls it. So we're going to get a double, and the name of it was price. So for consistency, name and price. Now these are going to get put into our map because it's storing it as key value pairs. So we can just say put the price and name as another thing in our fruit map. Now if it gets through all that, that means that it was successful, so we can say the process was complete. So the message to the user in our progress should say process complete. Now I'm going to say that instead of successful because it could be no results from our database, but at least we got that far in our code. Now we still have a result set that we can close, and we have a statement that is a resource that we need to close, and the third resource that we need to close is our connection. So it's a good practice to close any open resources that you happen to be using. So we're going to do that. But if a exception was thrown somewhere along the way in here, those resources would be left open. So we're going to add a finally block to close those open resources. Now the ones that will matter are going to be these two. The result set will disappear at the end of this block, so that'll be left to garbage collection. So all we have to do is try to close them if they're open. So we're going to say if statement is not equal to null, that means we got to close it. So stmt.close. And this one is going to require a catch block, so you can Alt-Enter to add that. And we're just going to print that. Now we're going to do the same thing again for connection. We just got to change the name. So I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to call that con. Change this to con. And now basically we're protecting our resources from staying open. We're closing them if necessary. Okay, so now we're going to add one more method. Okay, so now that we have attempted to retrieve data from the database, we want that result set to be shown. So to do that, we're going to, I'm going to put an override annotation, so that's just going to make sure that we're spelling this right. And it's called the onPostExecute method. So it's a void, which means it only does an action, and onPostExecute is its name. And it can take a string called message, which we're not going to use. But the names have to match to make it an override. So progress text view can set its text to this dot message. If we didn't have that this in there, then that means that it's going to use its parameter instead. So make sure that you get that in there. And if our fruits map, if its size is greater than 0, then that means that we've got stuff to display. So we're going to then use our item adapter and create a new item adapter out of it to initialize it. We have to give it this context, which is actually the parent class of this class called getData. And we're going to give it the fruits map to work with. And then we're going to put those in MyListView. So MyListView is going to set its adapter to item adapter. All right, now we're going to save it, and we're going to push play and see what happens. So now all we have to do is click the button and see if progress shows up and the list loads. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and it does. All right, so that is the walkthrough of how to use JDBC to connect to a MySQL database and load in that data into a list view.